As I began to notice the subtle changes in my wife Kate, it wasn't just the shift in her behavior or the increased time she spent outside the house that caught my attention. No, it was something else, something much more visceral that I couldn't ignore. Her belly had started to grow. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she'd just put on a few pounds, or perhaps it was just a temporary bloating. But as the weeks went by, that slight roundness seemed to become more pronounced, until it was unmistakably visible. We'd been married for 10 years, and although our relationship had its share of challenges, I always believed in the solid foundation we built together. Kate had always been the epitome of consistency, always planning our days meticulously, and making sure that everything ran smoothly in our household. But over the past few months, things had changed. She started staying out late, explaining it away with vague mentions of work dinners, new projects, or nights out with friends. Each time, she'd come home looking slightly disheveled, her makeup a bit too fresh for someone who had supposedly been working late. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now constantly within her reach. She'd guard it, like it held secrets too precious to let slip. And then there was that growing belly, which she didn't seem eager to explain. I remember one evening, sitting at the dinner table, trying to summon the courage to ask her about it. She was chatting away, telling me about her day, the people she met, all while avoiding my eyes. I watched her, studying every expression, every slight flicker of emotion that crossed her face, searching for a sign. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Kate," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I've noticed that your belly has gotten bigger." The room went silent, and she looked at me, eyes wide and slightly panicked. Her fork paused mid-air, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Was it fear? She quickly composed herself and gave a little laugh, brushing it off with a casual, "Oh, I guess I've just been indulging a bit too much lately." But her answer didn't satisfy me. I knew Kate too well. She was always so disciplined about her diet, so aware of every calorie she consumed. For her to suddenly indulge this much seemed out of character. That night, as I lay beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask. The whispers of doubt, the tiny voices I had pushed away for weeks, now screamed for my attention. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I noticed her looking at herself in the mirror, her hand resting on her belly, almost in a protective way. It felt like she was hiding something, something monumental. And the more I watched, the clearer it became, there was no way she was simply gaining weight. Kate's strange behavior had been troubling enough on its own, but the part that gnawed at me most was the memory of a conversation we'd had about 6 months ago. One night, completely out of the blue, she suggested opening up our marriage. I remembered every word of that night, each syllable still painfully vivid in my mind. We'd been sitting at home, just another quiet evening after dinner. I was half watching a show on TV, relaxed, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Then, she looked at me with that unreadable expression she sometimes had, almost as if she were bracing herself for something. "Jack, have you ever thought about opening things up between us?" she asked, her tone casual, like she was suggesting we try a new restaurant. It took a moment for her words to register. I remember laughing, thinking it was a joke. "Open things up? Like, an open marriage?" I asked, trying to play it off, hoping I'd misunderstood. She nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yeah, like, exploring other options. Some couples do it, you know. It could be exciting." That's when it hit me that she was serious. The air suddenly felt thick, heavy, pressing down on me. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to understand what she was really saying. We'd been married for a decade. We weren't perfect, sure, but I thought we were happy, that we were enough for each other. I had no idea she'd ever been interested in something like this. "Where is this coming from, Kate?" I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, her gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. "We've been together a long time, Jack. Sometimes, I just feel like maybe we're too comfortable, too predictable." Predictable. That word stung. But I held back, not wanting to jump to conclusions, not wanting to let my emotions get the better of me. Instead, I just sat there, listening as she painted a picture of a different kind of marriage, one where we could stay together, love each other, but also, as she put it, explore new things. She even went so far as to call it a modern way of keeping things interesting. I felt sick, but she kept going, telling me about couples she'd heard of who had tried it and claimed it had only made their marriages stronger. I tried to understand her perspective, to listen without letting my emotions drown me. After all, marriage is about compromise, about hearing each other out. But as she spoke, the image of our marriage, everything I thought it stood for, began to crack. I forced myself to remain calm and asked her if she'd been unhappy with me, with us. She assured me it wasn't about unhappiness, that she still loved me, that I still meant the world to her. She simply wanted more freedom and the chance to try new things. She even insisted that we could set boundaries, have rules, make sure it didn't change what we had. But no matter how much she tried to make it sound like something casual, the words coming out of her mouth felt foreign, impossible to digest. I felt like I was losing her, like some invisible wall was going up between us. I spent the next few days wrapped in turmoil, trying to make sense of what she'd said. My mind kept going back and forth. Was this just her way of venting? Was she trying to tell me she needed a change? I considered suggesting counseling, asking her to take a step back, to think it over. But I was so scared of coming off as controlling, of losing her even more, that I just told her I'd think about it. Part of me thought she'd drop it and we'd never have to bring it up again. For a while, it seemed like things had returned to normal. Kate didn't mention the idea again, and we went on as usual, back into our routines. But something was different. The warmth between us felt strained, her affection a bit too mechanical. She seemed distracted, often staring off into space, lost in her own world. Then, almost imperceptibly, her habits started to change. She began spending more nights out, explaining it away as nights with friends or work obligations. At first, I believed her. I'd even joke about her big social life. But over time, the explanation seemed thinner, her smiles when I asked about her plans, more distant. I'd try to ask her how she was doing, if she was okay, and she'd just brush me off, saying she was fine, that I was worrying too much. But that growing belly of hers told a different story. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't really known what she meant by exploring other options. I tried to ask her again one night as we were lying in bed, trying to sound casual, trying not to sound accusatory. So, about that thing we talked about months ago. About, an open marriage. Is that something you're still thinking about? I asked, pretending I was only curious. She didn't look at me, just mumbled, I told you, Jack, I was just thinking out loud back then. Don't make it a big deal. But it was a big deal. I could feel the distance, the unease growing between us. And her belly kept growing too, a constant reminder that something was wrong, something she wouldn't share with me. The thoughts I tried to suppress were getting louder, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was already too late, if my marriage, the woman I'd built my life with, was slipping away right in front of me. The more I thought about Kate's sudden interest in an open marriage and her growing belly, the deeper I sank into an emotional fog. The timeline gnawed at me. 6 months ago, she brought up the idea of exploring new things, and now, without any clear explanation, she had this unexpected weight gain. The pieces seemed too convenient, too suspicious to ignore. I tried to brush off my suspicions as irrational, tried to chalk them up to paranoia. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, there were details I couldn't ignore. Kate had always been private, but lately, it was like she was hiding an entire part of her life from me. She was constantly on her phone, quick to tuck it away if I walked into the room. When she went out, I no longer knew where she was going or who she was meeting. One night, lying in bed next to her as she scrolled through her phone, I felt this urge to reach over and just ask her, to demand some honesty. I imagined her turning to me, her face softening as she explained everything, giving me that reassurance I desperately needed. But when I opened my mouth, no words came. I was afraid of what I'd hear. That weekend, we went to a family gathering at her sister's house. Kate was chatty, mingling as she always did, but something about her seemed off. Her gaze flitted around the room as if she was looking for someone or watching for something. And her belly, there was no hiding it now. I noticed her sister glance at it a few times, a look of concern crossing her face. I wondered if I was imagining things, if I was just reading too deeply into everything. But then I overheard her sister in the kitchen, speaking in a hushed tone to their mom. "Have you asked her about it? I mean, it's hard to miss. What if she's pregnant?" My stomach tightened, and I almost dropped the plate I was holding. Pregnant? The thought felt absurd, impossible. Kate and I hadn't talked about kids in years, not since we decided to focus on our careers and just enjoy our life together. If she were pregnant, surely I would be the first to know. But the longer I stood there, the more the reality of that possibility crept in, chilling me to the core. The idea that she could be carrying someone else's child, just the thought of it, made me feel as if the ground had disappeared beneath me. Later that night, when we were home, I decided to confront her. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The nagging suspicions, the sleepless nights, I needed answers. I walked into the kitchen where she was cleaning up, took a deep breath, and steadied myself. "Kate, we need to talk." She froze, her back to me, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression guarded. "What's wrong?" she asked, though her voice was a little too calm, too controlled. I cleared my throat, trying to choose my words carefully. "I couldn't help but notice something at your sister's place today. People were looking at you. I think they're wondering about your belly." She immediately crossed her arms over her stomach, her face flushing with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "What are you talking about, Jack?" she snapped, her tone defensive. "I've just gained a little weight. Why is that such a big deal? Is it just weight, though?" I asked, my voice lower. "Kate, if there's something going on, if you're, I don't know, hiding something from me." She cut me off with a sharp laugh, the sound filled with bitterness. "So now you think you know me better than I know myself?" Her tone was harsh, but her eyes glistened with a look I hadn't seen before, something vulnerable, almost fearful. I took a step closer, softening my tone, hoping to break through the tension. "I don't know what to think, Kate. Ever since you brought up this open marriage idea, you've been different. You go out a lot more, you're distant, and now, there's this." I gestured toward her belly, and her gaze followed my hand, as if seeing it for the first time. She stared at me, her face hardening again, her defenses rising. "I'm not hiding anything from you, Jack. I'm just trying to find some happiness, to live a little." "Is that such a crime? Finding happiness?" I repeated, feeling the sting of her words. "Kate, we're supposed to be building a life together. I thought we were happy. Wasn't that enough?" She sighed, rubbing her temples as if exhausted by the conversation. "You're not listening. You never listen. I was trying to tell you that things have felt stale, that I wanted to explore, to figure out what I need to be truly happy." Her words hit me like a slap, each one twisting the knife deeper. I stared at her, feeling a storm of emotions raging inside me, anger, confusion, fear. It was like I was looking at a stranger. "So, what? I'm supposed to be okay with you just going out and finding happiness somewhere else?" I asked, barely able to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Jack, it's not that simple," she said, her tone softening just a bit. "I still love you. I don't want to hurt you. But we've been together for so long, and I feel like I need something more." Her words echoed in my mind, and I felt like I was losing her, like she was slipping through my fingers. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make her tell me the truth. But I knew that if I pushed too hard, I might shatter whatever fragile connection we still had. Finally, I took a deep breath and nodded, trying to hold on to some semblance of calm. "All right, Kate. If this is what you need." I'll try to understand. But I just need you to be honest with me. I can't keep living like this, with all these doubts and questions. She looked away, her jaw clenched, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then she turned back to me, her face unreadable. Fine. I'll try to be more open with you. But you have to trust me, Jack. Trust that I'm not doing anything to hurt you. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But as she walked away, the doubts lingered, burrowing deeper into my mind. I didn't know if she was being honest, or if she was just saying what I needed to hear to keep me at arm's length. That night, as I lay awake beside her, the silence between us felt like a chasm. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of everything that had changed, everything we'd lost. And despite her assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else, was hiding a secret that could tear us apart. After that painful confrontation with Kate, things didn't get any better. In fact, they got worse. A lot worse. I tried to be patient, to let her have her space, but the questions in my mind were multiplying faster than I could push them away. Every time I looked at her, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. And the way she was dressing lately, as if she were trying to hide something, or maybe flaunt something, only fueled my suspicions. Kate, who'd always worn simple, comfortable clothes, suddenly started opting for loose dresses and oversized sweaters, things that flowed over her body in a way that made it impossible to tell if her stomach was flat or rounded. Every morning as she got dressed, she'd give me a quick, guarded smile, then turn and head out the door. She wouldn't even let me in on her plans for the day anymore. It was as if she wanted to keep me guessing, to keep me wondering. One evening, after she came back from a night out with friends, I noticed her hanging up the phone with an unfamiliar grin, one that wasn't meant for me. It was subtle, just a quick smile as she ended the call, but it lingered long enough to make my heart sink. She caught me watching her and quickly wiped the expression from her face, as though realizing she'd let her guard down. She gave me a quick excuse about a funny story from her friend Sarah, but I wasn't convinced. This wasn't the way Kate used to be around me. She was hiding something, that much I was sure of. That night, as I lay beside her in bed, her phone lit up several times, buzzing quietly in the dark. She turned it face down on the nightstand, silencing it. I couldn't see who was texting her, but it was clear that someone was reaching out. I wanted to grab the phone, to demand answers right there, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew that if I acted too impulsively, she'd only become more secretive. And I was tired of feeling like I was in the dark. The next morning, I made a decision. If Kate wouldn't be honest with me, I'd have to find the truth on my own. I needed to find out who she was talking to so frequently, to see if these late-night texts were just casual conversations with friends, or something far worse. The idea of snooping made me feel uneasy. I'd never invaded her privacy like this before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was pulling away from me, that she was slipping into a life that didn't include me anymore. So, one evening when she was in the shower, I took a chance. I picked up her phone, my heart racing as I unlocked it. I'd barely looked at her messages in the past, and now I was scrolling through her recent contacts, scanning for any name or number that seemed out of place. Most of the names were familiar, family, close friends, but one stood out, B. There were dozens of messages from B, all at strange hours. Some were late at night, others during the middle of the day, and the tone of the texts. They weren't the type of messages friends exchanged. They were short, playful, full of inside jokes and emojis. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as I read through them. One message from B stood out, asterisk, miss you already. Let's meet soon. Asterisk. Miss you? Meet soon? My mind spun with questions. Was this who Kate had been going to see on her nights out? Was this, B, the reason for her strange behavior, her newfound distance? I forced myself to read more, even though every message felt like a punch to the gut. The messages were careful, never mentioning specifics, just little hints of plans, shared moments that didn't involve me. One particular text made my hands clench, Asterisk, can't wait to see that smile again. Asterisk. Just then, I heard the shower shut off. Panicking, I put her phone back exactly where I'd found it, my heart racing as I hurried back to the living room, trying to look casual. She came out a few minutes later, her hair wrapped in a towel, and gave me a quick, distracted smile. It was as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just been texting someone who clearly meant more to her than she'd ever let on. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed the messages over and over, dissecting each word, each little hint of affection. I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. I needed more answers. I needed to know who B was, to understand how long this had been going on and why she felt the need to hide it from me. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I needed to find out where she was going on these mysterious nights out. If I could just catch a glimpse of this B, maybe then I'd finally understand the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That night, Kate told me she was meeting up with some friends for a girls' night. She barely looked at me as she made her excuse, already halfway out the door. I waited until she left, watching through the window as she climbed into her car and drove off. Then, I grabbed my jacket and keys, determined to follow her. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, sneaking around to catch my own wife in the act. I tailed her car carefully, making sure to keep my distance. She drove to a part of town we rarely visited, parking outside a dimly lit restaurant. She got out, glancing around as if to make sure no one was watching, then walked inside. I waited, my heart pounding, watching the entrance. 15 minutes later, a man arrived. Tall, well-dressed, with a confident smile that made my blood boil. He walked inside, and through the glass, I could see him approach Kate's table. She stood up, and they hugged. It wasn't the hug of friends or even casual acquaintances. It was too close, too familiar, the kind of embrace you give someone you're excited to see, someone you've missed. They sat down together, leaning in close as they talked, their expressions relaxed, happy. I watched them, feeling a sick twist in my stomach, barely able to believe what I was seeing. She laughed, her hand resting on his arm as they spoke. This was my wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted for years, and she was here with him, sharing the kind of smiles and touches she used to reserve for me. I couldn't watch anymore. I stumbled back to my car, the weight of the betrayal settling in. My mind reeled as I sat behind the wheel, staring blankly at the road in front of me. So it was true. She had someone else, a secret life, a secret man, right here in front of me. The drive home felt like a blur, my thoughts spinning as I tried to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Kate was cheating. There was no denying it anymore. All the little clues, the hints I'd tried to ignore, they all pointed to this moment. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the truth. When she came home that night, I tried to act casual, forcing a smile as she walked in. She seemed to relax, maybe thinking her secret was safe. But now I knew the truth, and there was no going back. Over the next few days, I replayed the memory of that night, dissecting every look, every laugh she shared with him. The woman I loved had built an entire life behind my back, and now I had to decide if I could face that reality, if I could even begin to forgive the betrayal she so effortlessly concealed. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Kate approached me one evening, her face carefully neutral. She mentioned, almost too casually, that she needed to spend some time at her parents' place a few cities over. Just a few weeks, she explained, maybe a month and a half at most. She claimed they were undergoing major renovations and that they needed her help to oversee everything. The moment she said it, something snapped in me. I knew she was lying. I could see it in the way she avoided my gaze, the way her voice sounded too rehearsed, too carefully calm. We'd been married long enough that I could pick up on these things, and now I could see her excuses for what they really were, a cover for something much bigger. And I finally knew what that something was. My mind was reeling. The signs were all there, the sudden suggestion for an open marriage, her growing belly that she tried so hard to hide, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious B, who she had clearly been meeting. And now, this trip to her parents? No, this was her way of escaping. She wanted to hide away for the last few weeks of her pregnancy, have this child in secret, and then, what? Disappear? Leave me? I stood there, staring at her, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. My own wife was planning to start a new life, a life that didn't include me. She wanted to vanish for weeks, only to return with some story that would make everything neat and clean, leaving me none the wiser. I could feel the anger, the betrayal, welling up inside of me, and I knew I couldn't just stand there and let her get away with this. Kate, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm, I want you to tell me the truth. She gave me a quick, dismissive smile, waving her hand as if I were blowing things out of proportion. What are you talking about, Jack? I'm just helping my parents. They need me there. You know how my dad is with organizing things. But I didn't back down. No, this isn't about your parents. You're hiding something from me, and I'm done pretending not to see it. She froze, a flicker of something, fear, maybe, crossing her face. But she quickly masked it, putting on that calm, composed expression she'd mastered. Jack, you're being paranoid, she said, her voice too measured. I'm just going to help with the renovations. I could feel my frustration boiling over. Enough with the lies, Kate. If that's really all you're doing, then prove it to me. Go get an ultrasound, right here, right now. Let's end this charade. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear. She hadn't expected me to demand that. Jack, she stammered, her tone wavering, that's ridiculous. Why would I? Because I don't believe you, I cut her off, my voice harder than I'd intended. If you're not pregnant, if all of this is really just me overthinking, then prove it. Show me there's nothing to hide. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing, and for a moment, I thought she'd lash out, that she'd scream or storm off. But instead, she took a deep breath, her expression hardening. I don't have to prove anything to you, she said coldly. If you can't trust me, that's your problem. And with that, she turned and left the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my mind racing, wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. The woman I loved, the woman I'd trusted, was slipping further and further away, and I was powerless to stop it. Over the next few days, she barely spoke to me. She went about her business, packing her bags for her trip to her parents' house, ignoring me as if I were invisible. It was like living with a stranger, someone who was simply biding her time until she could leave. I knew I couldn't just let her walk away without answers. I had to confront her, one last time, to lay everything on the table and see if there was even a sliver of truth left between us. The night before she was set to leave, I found her in the living room, quietly folding her clothes into a suitcase. I took a deep breath, summoning the courage to face her, to demand the truth I knew she was hiding. Kate, I said, my voice steady but filled with the weight of everything I'd kept bottled up. If you leave tomorrow without giving me the truth, don't bother coming back. She looked up at me, her eyes flashing with defiance. You're giving me an ultimatum now? I'm not giving you anything, I replied, my voice hard. I'm just asking you to be honest, to give me some respect after all these years. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. Respect? You think you're entitled to answers when all you've done is doubt me, accuse me, treat me like some criminal? You've given me every reason to doubt you, I shot back. The late nights, the mysterious texts, the growing belly you won't explain. And now you're running off for 6 weeks, telling me it's to help with renovations. You can't expect me to believe that. Her expression softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that cold, distant look I'd grown used to. Jack, if you can't trust me enough to let me go, then maybe this isn't working anymore. I felt the words hit me like a punch, knocking the air out of my lungs. You're really just going to leave me, just like that? She shrugged, her face unreadable. If you can't accept me for who I am, for what I need, then yes. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, feeling the weight of everything we'd built crumble in an instant. I wanted to scream, to demand that she stay, that she finally be honest. But I could see it in her eyes, she was already gone. No matter what I said, no matter how much I begged or pleaded, she'd made her choice. The next morning, she left without a word. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, disappearing down the road, leaving me standing there in the empty house we'd once called home. The silence was deafening, pressing down on me, reminding me of everything I'd lost. In the weeks that followed, I tried to focus on anything but the gnawing emptiness she'd left behind. I threw myself into work, into old hobbies, trying to fill the void, but nothing worked. Every night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was out there, living the life she'd wanted without me. If she'd gone through with her plan, if she'd had the baby, or if she was still hiding from the truth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I decided I couldn't keep waiting for answers that would never come. I needed closure, even if it meant facing the possibility that Kate had betrayed me in the worst way. I called her parents, asking if they'd heard from her. Her mother sounded surprised, saying she hadn't visited at all, that the renovations had been postponed. That was it. The last shred of doubt was gone, replaced by the certainty I'd been trying to deny. Kate had lied, had crafted an elaborate story to leave, to escape, to hide a truth she didn't want me to see. And I knew, with a painful finality, that she wasn't coming back. In the end, there was nothing left to fight for. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd devoted my life to, had vanished, leaving me with nothing but a broken heart and a hollow sense of betrayal. And as much as I wanted answers, I realized I'd never get them. I was left with the silence, with the memories of what once was, and the bitter truth that the life we'd built had been nothing but a lie.